Welcome, everyone, to the Inclusion Podcast. I'm Dr. Julie Costin.
And I'm Dr. Christy Preddy-Franzak. We're so glad you're here as we explore all things inclusion.
So whether you're a school leader, an educator, a parent, or simply passionate about inclusion, this podcast is for you.
In each episode, we go beyond the usual conversations, diving into what truly makes inclusive education work.
Together, let's make a difference, one conversation at a time. Here we go. Welcome to episode 35, and we're going to talk all about those behavior charts, those dojos, those behavior clips that we see in schools still all the time as we go from school to school.
Well, Julie, should we do a spoiler alert? Because you said we're going to talk about something we see all the time. Should we kind of give a heads up or just dive in?
Let's dive in.
All right. So how do you want to frame it? Since I was going to do a spoiler alert.
Okay, spoil it for us. Go for it.
Well, I was going to say that while we see them all the time, we go around wishing we could tear them down all the time.
100%. Yes.
And then I thought, well, I guess for me, the important thing is that we talk about why do we see them? Why do we tear them down? And what do we do instead?
Yeah. So today's going to be a lot about what to do instead, but I do think we should explain why we despise behavior charts and clips and the things of that nature, even the dojos, all the electronic ones. So many people are using these systems still today, and they really started at the dawn of schooling, thinking about ways to publicly support behavior. And what that means is publicly make people feel bad about their behavior, specifically if they struggle with behavior. And so anytime anything related to behavior is public, we think it should be instead private, supported but between the student and the teacher in a different way other than in a public way.
Well, Julie, let's break that down for a minute, because I think two things at least that I want to play a yeah, but to you. One is folks that are listening are going to say, yeah, but it works. So okay, that one. And the second one is, but what if, so those are my two yeah buts.
Mm-hmm.
But what if I'm using positive language, or I'm using pretty colors, or my chart is full of unicorns and glitter, that I'm like using it to praise people.
Mm-hmm.
So tell me more about like the problem with it being public, especially if I think my intention is good and or I think it's working.
Yeah, I think everybody who's doing this has a good intention. So I want to start there. So I have yet to find a teacher that says, yep, I use this because I really enjoy publicly shaming students. I've never seen it. Everybody says theirs is different, but I'm going to start with your first question. It works. It works. So let's say it works to do what? And for the long term or the short term? So those are the two questions I usually ask beyond that. It works to create temporary compliance. Yes. Usually out of fear. Yes. And it works to create distrust between teacher and student. It works to create a rift in the relationship. So I'll just give a very quick example. When I used to teach college, if the students had done the reading and they came in, I don't know how they believed it was true, but I had a big behavior chart, huge behavior chart in class. And all my undergrad students who were studying to be teachers had their name on the board. And there were 3 cards, a green, a yellow, and a red. And I explained to them, I'm really tired of people talking. I've got to have a new system. We're going to use this today. And the consequences if you get on red are that you have to write an additional paper that covers everything that we've done for the whole semester. And usually they're very wide-eyed. And then I start having people publicly pull their clips, pull their chart, pull their card, I guess I should say. And it becomes silent in the room. Silent. People sit up. They don't even reach over to get snacks. They don't even do all the things that they used to do. And toward the end, I wait until somebody gets on red based on their behavior, and then we discuss it. And we talk about, I say, but wait, you guys, from my perspective, it worked. And they'll say, worked? I was scared to death. I was afraid to even ask for a pen to write that down because I knew I would get called. And they just start to explain to me that, yes, they were silent. And yes, they were still. But it was because of fear, and it was because of fear of punishment. So it works maybe in the temporary, and it works because of fear, but it is very detrimental to human beings in so many ways related to their ability to learn.
Well, and I think let's just take that for a second, Julie,
Mhm.
because you said fear and it temporarily works and it works out of fear and fear is temporary. Like, you said it many different ways. And what we
Mm.
know about the human nervous system is that it can't grow, develop, learn, make good choices, if you will, when it operates from a hyper or hypo arousal. And fear, depending on, how you've grown up or what your body reads it as, it could either cause that hyper arousal or that hypo arousal. So it's going to actually push kids to withdraw or to shut down or to become rigid or to feel chaotic in their bodies. You might even get the opposite. You might get kids acting out. I was going to it reminded me when you were talking about your students, a colleague of mine who was a kindergarten teacher had a kid who, while she was still using the system, walked up one morning and put his clip on red and just said, basically, it's going to happen and let's just all agree to it. And I'm going to do what I want today because I'm already on red. He said it in his 5-year-old language, but the the opposite happened. Your students kind of, probably because they were a little older and there was like a little bit of peer pressure, they probably withdrew and had a lot of anxiety. But this 5-year-old was like giving his teacher the finger basically and saying, well, we're headed this direction anyway. Let's just get it over with and I can have a free pass the rest of the day, which is not working.
Yes, I saw a student do the same thing. She pulled her card on purpose without anyone telling her to do it, and she said, "We all knew I was headed here anyways." And so the concept being like, I'll have control over a system that has control over me in a pretty profound way. So yes, I've seen all sorts of wonky things with behavior charts, and teachers will say it works, and I think there's one more thing that I was gonna say about those grown-up people who are, in their 20s or 19, 18. They said, "Julie, I felt so bad. You asked me to pull a card, and I thought you liked me." So this was
Mhm.
another part of it is they talked a lot about our relationship and how they got busted and what that felt like, and they started to question our relationship just because of that experiment in that classroom.
Yeah, or their perception of what they had already believed about your relationship. And even if you didn't change, they now changed, maybe forever,
Mhm.
how they trusted themselves or trusted you.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
let's talk one more thing about temporary, and then perhaps we shift gears to some solutions or some replacement behaviors, if you will. So, if we do want to tear them down, or maybe there's more you want to say about the behavior charts and clips, but I was going to give another adult example that I experienced on a road on the way to my house. There's one of those signs that tell you how fast you're going and how fast you should be going.
Sure.
And I get in a fight with it every day because it starts blinking at me, telling me I'm going too fast and to slow down. It's very public. So the car in front of me knows it's me. The car behind me knows it's me, and I am a rule follower. So I'm having an argument with it that I'm not yet to the sign. And so, like my GPS still says I can go 45. I know when it's going to be 30, and I always decrease my speed because I drive the speed limit. So I have a fight with it every day because it's like telling my neighbors that I'm speeding, but technically I'm not. So I have this whole conflict with it.
That's right. I mean, just think of your inner conflict with a sign that's inanimate, right?
Right.
And then think about the personal inner conflict for small children. And we have to remember that in the example of my students who are going to be teachers soon, they have pretty developed brains comparatively. And so they can handle a lot more than a 6-year-old, a 7-year-old, an 8-year-old, and it's much more significant for them. So the only other thing, and people say it to us all the time, is, "No, I agree, charts, they're not good." But what I do is I only like someone said to me, "I just have balloons that rise, and they're hot air balloons, and then they're up in the sky and stuff." And we were talking, and we were looking at the chart, and she was showing me that, yeah, we just go up. That's only way is up. And I'm like, Are there any balloons still on the ground? Yes, but they struggled that day. Right, but it's still public. My balloon is still on the ground, right? So there are all these different ways that people want it to work, but we have to remember, what does it seem like, especially for our most vulnerable learners who have the most challenging behavior. These charts are designed for them, and they do the most damage to them.
And I would say about the working, like I already wasn't speeding. And so I look compliant because I'm so pressured now to slow down before anybody can see it saying going too fast. So it looks like it's having its intended effect. But I guarantee you, my husband probably speeds up just because of it,
Mm.
just to act out. So
Mhm.
oftentimes the person it's working for is the person who either internalizes it or was already going to be compliant in the first place, or has
That's right.
the, maybe if I may say, the privilege, the bandwidth, the nervous system that allows them to be able to look like their balloons are floating.
That's right. And one more example, there was a race car track in one classroom, and I was looking around and they were saying to me, "See, look, it doesn't matter. Everyone's going around the room on the race car track, so it's not a big deal." But then there was this one kid named Miles, and I looked at his number and he was far behind everybody else. And I was like, "Well, what about Miles?" And they said, "Well, Miles struggles most in the classroom." But it was very visual to me. Like, I could see it right away, but in their mind, it was a track that went around and around. So people were lapping Miles for sure, but you could see how many miles he went. So, and then his name was Miles, which I thought was hilarious.
Yeah,
So,
of
yeah.
course, of course. Okay, so Julie, we have 5 minutes. So let's give some solutions, our best tips and tools. And I should say to folks that the download for this episode is on our website, on the show notes, in all the places where you are listening. It's inclusiveschooling.com/download 35. And so Julie and I are going to take a few minutes and highlight several things from the download that we feel are both short-term and long-term solutions. They're not temporary. They certainly aren't public shaming. They are mindset, heart set, skill set. There's a whole combination. So you go first, Joel.
Yeah, so the handout that you're going to download if you're interested for free is 9 inclusive ideas for replacing behavior charts and clips. So what we do is give you 9 alternatives to those things. And we can talk about a lot of them, Christy, but let's start with number 3. Idea number 3 says change your lens and change your language.
Okay.
So part of the work of an educator is changing their lens, their language, which actually is their mindset when it comes to challenging behaviors. So what part of 3 do you like the best, Christy?
Well, I was thinking that I love it whenever you help us restory or how you help us shift from what we currently do to what we might do instead. And
Mhm.
so I guess the one that I picked as I looked at the list of, like, I don't know, maybe 10 things, you'll find it on the handout at download 35, but it says, let's move away from working on students to working with students. And I think that maybe that sounds pie in the sky, but I think especially if you're working with older students who maybe have, 10 years of experience with untrustworthy relationships with adults and schools that intend well but intentionally continue to marginalize them or in some way show that their identities aren't welcome. That one for me is like, if I'm working with the student, I could ask them, how do they want feedback? Or why is this a struggle? Or why do you always not have your pencil? Or, why are you saying names out loud to me? Like, not those exact words, but
Mhm.
that's why I'm wondering more about. And I want to work with them to solve it versus, trying to do something with a clip or a note home or a call down to the office.
Mhm. Yeah, it's a more challenging solution, it's a more long-term solution, but when you invite kids to the table to do the brainstorming and invite kids to the table to create student success plans, instead of sitting together with 5 adults around the table trying to think of what rewards and punishments we're gonna come up with to get this kid to do what we want them to do. I love that, it's just a better way. So from working on students to working with students. I'm going to just pick some of the language we use, and it really helps me reframe. So when I taught fourth grade, I had a lot of kids who were attention seeking in lots and lots of ways. And when I switched from thinking, oh, these kids are so attention seeking to these kids need attention,
Mhm.
it's like, oh, yeah, that's what they need right now. That changed because all of a sudden I realized, oh, my job is to give attention to kids instead of being annoyed at their attention-seeking behavior. Same kind of thing from this kid needs a reward to no, this kid needs connection. They need a consequence to they need support actually. And so it's internal language that I'm using with teachers or with by myself, but it really helps me come to the student with new compassion or new empathy or new ways of seeing, I guess.
And so Julie and I just walked through a couple of examples of number 3 out of 9. I'm going to list one of the 9, and then Julie, you can do one as well as we start to think about how to put this in practice. I'm
Mhm.
going to do idea number 6 of 9, which is
Mm.
respond effectively and respectfully in the moment. I think I've been doing too much TikTok research. And if anyone doesn't know what that it just means scrolling endlessly for hours on TikTok, but I call it TikTok research. But when I think of respond effectively and respectfully in the moment, too often I see and I understand the frustration of educators on TikTok being really upset with calling down to the office or calling for support in a classroom where they're trying to teach, where oftentimes a student is being disrespectful or disruptive. And so they ask the kid to be taken out. And then their perception is that the kid gets to go have a snack or bag of chips or a lollipop, and then they come back. And it's like, okay, I think that whole scenario, while there's always a bit of truth in it, if we can think about this is not being permissive, it's just how do I respond effectively in this moment, meaning don't flip my lid, set the boundary and enforce the boundary, be respectful to the student because I'm modeling what I want from them, and to do it in the moment versus someone else trying to deliver it somewhere else. And if it can't be in that exact moment, taking a breath and coming back to it as soon as our lids have been put back on. So that's kind of a longer one than I meant, but it just every time I think about our current strategies and our current frustration with behaviors, I think there's a lot we could do here for a minute about thinking what might be effective in the moment for everyone involved, including the other students.
Yes. Yes. Okay. And I'm going to pick the last one. I'm going to pick idea number 8, which is examine the classroom, not the student. So we always see the student as the object of remediation, like we got to fix this kid. And instead, we ask you to think about the classroom as the object of remediation, meaning how can we improve this classroom, this experience, what's happening? So some questions under number 8 that I love is the first one, is the content interesting? How could we make it even more interesting? Does this student feel seen and safe? How can we help them feel more seen and safe? Does the student need different support, right? So it's all these questions. I think there are at least a dozen questions for you to look at to examine how can we make this classroom a place where learning is a better experience for everyone. This helps with all kinds of behaviors from those big outliers, the kids that are going to struggle all the time, to kind of your run-of-the-mill kids who are just and shut down and struggling because they're bored. I also recommend bringing kids in to solve these problems. So how do we make it more interesting? We have to learn this. We have to read this book. We have to do this thing. How can we make it more interesting?
Yeah. So if you're interested, speaking of interesting, in all 9 of, as Julie mentioned, that we are thinking about all of these 9 ways to really replace, we say burn, tear down, but just replace behavior charts and clips. Grab them anywhere you find this episode in the show notes and at inclusiveschooling.com/download 35.
Thank you for tuning in, and don't forget to subscribe and catch up on past episodes where we share valuable insights, straight talk, and practical steps to challenge outdated special education practices. You can find every episode with the show notes at inclusiveschooling.com/inclusion-podcast. to build more inclusive schools together.